Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, ata Māori kia koutou, nā mau haere mai ki te hui tīnei. Karakia tātou, whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tunga, kia mai kina ki uta, kia mai taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te ata kia ora, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, a tihei, mauri ora. Welcome everybody, I've given you warm greetings and said welcome to the hui. And at this stage, we have nobody on Zoom, although people could come in if they find it a scintillating meeting to be a part of. Housekeeping. Apologies for absence, none. Declarations of interest, none. And just to note that Claire Scott, your last day, and a special morning tea for you at 10:30, and we'll have an extended morning tea to accommodate that and make sure you're seen off in a suitable fashion. And in terms of the report, I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Just to actually before that, look, I know that you've been working late and long and been pressed to get this to where we are now, and I really, really appreciate the work that anybody and everybody's been putting in to make that happen. Yeah, thank you.
Right, through the chair. So today we are here to discuss the recommended changes to the draft stock control and droving bylaw. So over the last 2 weeks or week and a few days since the hearings and deliberation of the hearing submissions, we've done a lot of work to incorporate the feedback that we got from submissions and the conversations that we had about what we thought would be a good direction to take the draft bylaw in. And you've gotten, over the last few days, you've gotten some copies of what we've been working on, and as had Federated Farmers and the Golden Bay Community Board. So we should be fairly well on track to have a good discussion about these changes that we've put into the resolutions. So I suggest, and we talked about this before, that we just go through the clean version of the resolutions. Over the last day or so, we've made a few changes to them since the report went up. So we've got some additional resolutions, but we'll walk you through that and identify any of those, and we can reference back to the tracked change version if we want to be really sure about what exactly the change was. Does that sound like a good?
It does sound like a good
plan.
Is it a thumbs up, or you got something already?
No,
oh, good.
Thumbs
up emoji. Very good. Let's click.
All right. Okay, so just overall, the feedback that we got from 22 submissions was all in the same direction, saying that while they supported the intent to increase road safety, or rather to ensure road safety, and to keep the roads and the waterways clean through the activity of moving stock, while the intentions were supported, the actual requirements in the bylaw were seen as overly regulatory and unnecessary for this activity. So by and large, all of the changes that we've recommended have scaled it back, have tweaked things to hopefully make it more practicable and realistic for farmers to deliver on and abide by without having to change really what they do, which is already good practice by and large. So the first, I don't know if you want to receive the report first, or should we just go through the resolutions?
Through the chair, my suggested approach is to work through each issue and the repackaged resolutions, kind of bundle them by theme, so we can talk through the theme and then make any tweaks that you want to make to those resolutions, and just keep going through. And then once we've gone through the list of them, then come back, and then my suggestion would be to resolve all of them at once and take a vote at that point.
Agree. Thank you. I think it's a good way ahead. Yep.
All right, so through the chair, the first theme that we'll talk about is the effluent fouling of the road management and how the bylaw looks to sort of regulate that. So previously, there were references to the NPS freshwater and Te Mana o Te Wai, and also probably most controversially the 50-meter setback required for farmers to hold their stock back before going onto the road reserve. So the first point one there is removing all references to the MPS on fresh water and Te Mana o Te Wai.
What's lost in doing that?
Yeah, through the chair, good question. We have looked into that quite a lot, and we've come to the decision that it doesn't actually add any additional requirements or really strengthen what's already in the bylaw.
Yeah, through the chair, I might just add, it was meant to embody the philosophy more than anything. It's not as if there's a direct regulatory link through to this bylaw from those regulations, but we were trying to embody the direction that the government, and I think the council in general, was taking us on, which is looking after our freshwater bodies better. And so Te Mana o Te Wai, I guess, is the kind of overarching concept. And we were just referencing where one of the key documents it's referenced in, which is the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. But in of itself, it's really just context. What matters is what the obligations are. So I guess my view is you can still have obligations in here, and we do retain some, or recommend you retain some, without necessarily referencing the concept or the principle.
Has it been a case of scaring the horses? I mean, is that what, so we do in principle, that is councils, council are required to, not to just embody those matters. So I guess I just suppose here we're upfront about if we withdrawn them to make it more palatable. I'm not sure.
Yeah, through the chair. So our regulatory group manager had some concerns around referencing, even if it's a concept, referencing it in the bylaw before the instrument it's really meant to be worked through, which is the Tasman Resource Management Plan, the TEP. He had some concerns that we were probably putting this issue and the concept in the bylaw ahead of a wider consideration of the issue through that regulatory mechanism. So that was his rationale for suggesting we remove it.
Right, there's quite a few puns here, aren't there? But cart before the horse. So it's good for me to have that, to have that understanding. So that's what I'm wanting to hear about the how come, because I know there is a, Te Mana o Te Wai, among some people that there's a freak out about that, but that makes a lot of sense to me about how come it would be taken out now.
Yeah, and through the chair, we thought it was a fair decision to remove that, because it didn't, like Dwayne said, it was really sort of adding, just the co-papa of the piece of, of the bylaw. It didn't actually change what was required of farmers in order to clean up the roads. Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah, no, I think Claire's made the point I was about to make, is that number two, the next one sort of takes us to that place, doesn't it? Without directly saying where there's a requirement not to foul streams. Best attempts, reasonable efforts, which I think is a fair requirement.
Yep.
What we don't want is people trying to do it deliberately.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So the next bit is amending section 7.11 to refer to making reasonable efforts. So that's underlined because it's the key change is from XYZ requirements. You must do this to keep the road clean, to do what's reasonably practicable in order to keep things clean. So reasonable efforts to avoid effluent on the road or road margins be removed in such a way that fecal matter is not washed into a stream or wetland if cleanup is required. Cherie.
Hi, kia ora, Cherie. Thanks for joining us. Can you hear?
I can, thank you.
Oh, lovely that you've joined us. Thank you. And is that approach into about reasonable efforts? Is that found in other bylaws around the country? Is that sort of an approach that's doing something unusual here? Yep.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
All right. If there's no more comments on that point, we can move on to 3. So 3 is talking about that 50-meter setback. So it's removing any specific requirements as to how the road is kept reasonably clear of excessive fouling, including the 50-meter setback requirement. yet it retains the requirement to clear excess fouling and the ability for council to take action if, in its view, excess fouling has not been addressed adequately. All right, and point 4, listing a range of methods to reduce fouling on the road, including mats, on-road cleanup, holding stock back, but allow farmers flexibility to do what best suits their specific circumstances.
Yes.
On that, in relation to mats, should that be mats on crossings? Because that's where it is. And the example is Higgins Road, where, and it's not a dairy farm now, but it was, and he used to cross that twice a day. So he had mats. There's one in Swamp Road where he doesn't have mats, and he doesn't always cross because it depends where the cows are, and it's not a big herd, 150 in that herd on the one of our few dairy farms near Richmond. But at times I've seen excessive fouling there, and I think mats would be appropriate when he is crossing, and that means twice a day, because 150 cows crossing to and from milking can make a big mess. So to me, I would add on crossings.
Which I think, our roading team encourages that, don't we, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, certainly adding the words on crossings just helps clarify in case there was any lack of clarity. But I mean, when you talk to farmers, I think most of them have already heard of such things, and the reasons they don't use them is that they obviously it doesn't suit them for some reason. But maybe it'll become more popular as we begin to enforce, this bylaw and begin to take a more proactive approach. Yeah.
I think I take your point, Councillor. I think in that in 4, it's really talking about the list of the range of things that can be used, and I mean, if you think there's value in adding in terms of crossings, that's all good. I was just thinking about people using what's appropriate in their situation. I guess someone might deem that a mat on the crossing, I don't want to do that, but council could encourage it if it's thought that it was. Dwayne.
Madam Chair, resolutions 2, 3 and 2, 4, they relate to the section of the draft bylaw that only relates to crossings. So all of this, all of those requirements there, they were specifically related to crossings. I guess I'm indifferent as to whether you leave on crossings there, because all the section 3 and 4 apply to crossings.
Okay, well, that's probably covered there then. Thank you. Traffic and road safety.
Just through the chair, I just wanted to add, just to clarify, that while we're listing suggestions here for how it could be managed, farmers are not required to use any of those, and it's up to them completely how it's managed. And the bylaw only really comes into effect if it isn't managed properly or cleaned up sufficiently.
Thank you.
So it's a question, Madam Chair, of Jamie. Do you get complaints or do your staff see damage on those crossings? Because that's what I've seen in other parts of the country. And do we actually talk to the dairy farmers concerned?
Yeah. Through Madam Chair, we do get complaints about stock crossings. Not frequently, but certainly at least 1 or 2 a year. And we always follow up with the farmer involved. And I'm in my, I guess, many years involved in our roads now. I've seen various issues that have arisen that we've had to deal with. And in the past, we've taken all sorts of approaches as far as sort of helping encourage or getting a contribution from a farmer for asphalting that particular part of the road, for example, because the chip seal just gets smashed up. And sometimes we've been proactive ourselves just to get it done. But it's relatively common, but it's not an overwhelming problem.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, moving on to traffic and road safety. This is probably the section of the bylaw that is the most heavy on changes. So there was quite a significant restructure in how we wrote up this section in response to the feedback from the submissions that we got. So if we just go through them one by one here, we'll get to all the different points. So 5 there is amend road safety requirements in section 7 to allow farmers to choose at least 2 out of 7 road safety measures listed in resolution 26, so just below, which we'll get to in a second, to best suit their situation, except in the circumstances that follow, which is nighttime crossings and crossings on state highways. So this is the fundamental change here, is that rather than prescribing in all situations, farmers have to do this or that, have a sign a certain distance away, just for any crossings, even on a local road. What we've done is say, here are 7 different options, road safety measures. For normal crossings, just on a local road, you can just pick the 2 that suit your situation best.
Yeah, I just said one thing. So this was a direct consequence of the feedback, and indeed this is an adaptation of a submission point that one of the submitters made, which was give us a toolkit, approved toolkit of things that we can do. We've actually added a couple extra in there, just to be clear. One is around amber fixed posts, fixed lights, rather than having mobile systems. So people who have heavy crossings, for example, it's entirely appropriate that they might want to set up amber light systems because it's convenient, especially if you just got one person getting in the herd. And the other one was just around vehicles with flashing amber lights or with headlights and hazard lights on. Whereas I think the bylaw that was referenced by the submitter required signage on that vehicle as well. So just trying to provide a few more tools in the toolkit. And you'll see further on that where we think the environment or the risk is higher, then we've specified a couple of particular actions that they need to pick from, plus some others, just to kind of cover off those risks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for including the thing about the fixed amber light. I was thinking of crossings at home that go through, and the way it was worded didn't quite reflect that setup. So thank you for that. Anything, councillors?
Maybe I'm getting too paranoid, but just explain the A to me. So you've got 2 cones on either side of the crossing.
So through the chair.
Not less than 30 metres apart, well, the road corridor is only 20, usually.
So A there, the first one, is taken directly from the Waikato livestock bylaw, actually. It's one of the ones listed there. And the 30 metres apart is in reference to along the road reserve. So the cones would act as a pre-warning for the crossing a bit, 30 metres out. I could draw it up on the.
Yeah, I think we should see this drawing, actually.
Okay. Did you want? Are you feeling artistic, Dwayne?
Put a sketch up on the whiteboard, I think, just to. Do we need all this up here? Is this current?
Probably shouldn't have this on here anyway.
Yeah, it looks like it's sort of thin stuff.
Okay.
Hopefully I've taken a photo or got it.
Okay.
That's the crossing.
Yeah.
Just drawing an image up here, Sheree. Not sure if you can see that or not.
And so these are the approaches.
Yeah. And
The distance between the 2 cones is the main point, isn't it?
yeah, and if there were to be an additional cone, it would be 30 metres here. So there's an approach, so a warning approach.
Yeah. So not less than 30 metres.
You can't just put 2 cones right here next to each other.
But you've got to have 2 cones on each side of the crossing, so you've got to have 4 cones, don't you?
Yeah, 2 cones on either side of the crossing. So there and there. So it almost acts as a little bit of a sign.
So the wording is 2 orange cones, not less than 900 high, on either side of the crossing.
Yes.
Should have said both sides.
Maybe it should say both.
Both, that's what we want.
Actually, what I suggest you put each.
On each side of the crossing. I think that's going to do it, isn't it?
Yeah. Because you could have them all on the same side, couldn't you? Well, and theoretically you should have them on that side and that side diagonally, because if you have them there, there's no effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is the point of it, isn't it? So if you've had a bit to do with stock, I believe, in your times, councillor. And if you're reading through one of these and sort of going, what does it quite mean? So that's a good pickup, eh? Is that
Yes.
all
Two
good
ways of
there?
interpreting that.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's another one further on too. but we'll get
Sure.
there.
yeah, thank you.
On each side of the road is what we really need, isn't it? On each side of the crossing and on each side of the road, is that everyone?
Isn't it a given that traffic are going that way and coming down that way, and that's where the signalling would happen? Is that a councillor Mailing?
Madam Chair, to me, I think if you just put on each side of the road, as I say, these farmers aren't dumb, and those stock are worth an average of between $1,500 and $2,000 each. So they're going to want to protect their stock because that's when they're quite vulnerable. So if they've got to put out cones, they're going to put them where it slows the traffic. That's my view. I thought if we keep adding words, it just makes it harder for them to read and interpret.
We're happy with the each. We're thinking that's going to clarify us a little more.
Yep. I think
Okay,
that's
thank you.
clear.
Uh,
Right, through the chair, moving on to B, personnel wearing high-vis gear. So that's pretty self-explanatory.
and I think there's been a consolidating of language around day glow and high vis so that we've got
That's right.
one term going through. Thank you.
Yes, throughout the whole bylaw, everything is now high-vis. So any references to day glow are gone. All right, moving on to C.
Carry on. Yep.
Signage indicating stock on the back or front of pilot vehicles with flashing amber lights or with headlights and hazard lights on. So this one had a little bit of a change to it. The first change that's probably significant is we removed high vis from signage. And this is in response to some feedback we got from Cherie, actually. Talking about how, because droving is not allowed in the bylaw at night anyways, and it may be difficult for farmers to source a high-vis sign that would fix easily onto the front or back of their vehicles, allowing them the flexibility to use some other sort of sign that maybe they make themselves using a bright colored spray paint or something, just giving them the flexibility to do that so long as the sign is indicating stock.
Happy with that? Yep, thank you.
Yep. All right, D, vehicles with flashing amber lights or with headlights and hazard lights on.
Pretty straightforward. Yep.
E, NZTA TW6 static signs, so that's the standard stock signs, placed approximately 150 meters from the crossing point. So this incorporates the change from 300 meters to 150 meters. After all of the submission comments, we determined that 300 meters was probably in most cases excessively far away from the crossing.
Thank you.
Through the chair, the 150 does have some science behind it. It's I believe it's estimated stopping distance for someone traveling on a sealed road at 100 kilometers an hour. So there's basically that slowdown period. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I just ask Claire, so are these particularly for crossings and or driving or just for crossing?
Through the chair, so these are for both, that you could be used for both, with the exception of the amber lights on poles. So which is
and what about the one we've
G.
just done for E? Is that a requirement for crossings?
Yeah, from the crossing point. So we incorporated it by saying that. I think we had significant feedback that static signs are not really suitable to droves, given that by the time you start moving, you're too far away from the sign anyways. Hence the use of the pilot vehicles with a sign instead.
And it's one of the options, so not necessarily required, but don't we on state highways require us to have a static sign there?
Through the chair, when we get to the specific chart which details the requirements for state highways, you'll see that we've identified a few must-haves for those crossings because they're higher risk. Yeah.
But it's clarifying that these were for crossings and drives.
Yeah,
it's the selection, right? There's a list here that will be chosen. What
Correct. If
what's
you're on
most
if you're
appropriate.
on a low traffic road, you wouldn't need to go to E.
That's-
Yeah,
that's right, you wouldn't-
West Bank Road,
Yeah.
for example. I'm using that one because you've been there.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, through the chair. So these 7 options are for state, for not state highways and during the hours of daylight.
Yeah.
So just all those local roads, which is most roads in Tasman. So F is personnel holding high-vis flags to alert traffic. The only change there has been, it previously said staff, not personnel, just a minor change.
And so there's a consistent use of that language as well.
Yes,
Personnel.
Yeah.
Over. Yep, thank you.
yes, there is. And lastly, we have G on the next page, which starts out saying for crossings only. An amber flashing light on each side at each side of the road at the start and end points of the crossing, visible to all traffic approaching the crossing. So at least 2 lights, 1 on each side.
So through the chair, someone could choose to have 4 lights, or they could choose to have 2 lights, but they're visible to the approaches on both sides. So basically, when you're driving up to it, what you see is 2 amber lights on one other side of the crossing, and you know there's something going on in the middle, so you slow down.
Thank you.
All right.
So that's that section of the 7
Yes,
options.
that's right.
Yep.
So moving on to 7 there, 2.7. So overall, what we've done is we've tried to make the requirements for higher risk situations, state highways and nighttime crossings, easier to read and just more straightforward than it was when it had previously been written all in words. So we've put this into use the A, B, C, D, E, F, G that we've just gone through, and we've referenced those in this chart below. So hopefully that will be able so that people in charge of stock can just find their situation. Yep, state highway, I'm droving, this is what I have to do. And then go back and look at that alphabetical list. So, yep, so again, it's 7 just says amend section 7 of the bylaw to include the following table to identify road safety requirements for crossing and droving on state highways and dairy herd crossings undertaken at night. So if we go through this chart here, we've got state highways and at night, and then droving and crossing on the side. So for example, for droving on a state highway, what we've recommended is saying must use measure C plus at least 1 other measure. So if we go back, C is signage indicating stock on the back and front of pilot vehicles with amber lights or headlights and hazard lights on.
Yep.
That's good.
So that would be the 1 requirement. So it'd be that and any other choice.
That makes sense. And it's clear. That's clear to me. Yeah.
Clear to me.
And if we move over, droving at night is just not allowed.
That's fair enough.
Crossing, we go down to crossing. So crossing on a state highway. So must use 2 measures from the list, including at least 1 of either D, E, or G. So if we go back, D is vehicles with flashing amber lights or with headlights and hazard lights on. E is those TW6 static signs placed 150 meters from the crossing point. And G is those amber flashing lights on posts on either side of the crossing. So that's state highway during the day crossing. So farmers could pick to have vehicles with lights on, signs, official signs, or the lights on either side of the crossing, plus at least 1 other measure.
It seems reasonable and clear to me. Yep.
Does that meet the NZTA requirement? Oh, for you,
Yeah.
Does that meet the NZTA requirement?
Well, and through the chair, NZTA has given authority over to TDC to manage this, and there isn't really any requirements, it's just guidelines. So. All right.
Well, now, perhaps I just ask Claire further. So, like, where it's a permanent crossing, I'm just wondering about the vehicle thing. Aren't we better that they have permanent amber lights on a pole or something like that? Although I guess you got the pad, it's the issue, isn't it?
Well, through the chair, I think sort of the point of what we've recommended here is that farmers would have the ability to make that choice. So if it was easier for them to just have permanent amber flashing lights, they could do that. If they wanted to bring their vehicles out every time, that would be up to them.
Yeah, the point that the chair made earlier, it's just one person and you've got to have two vehicles. Yeah, you probably would use the other one, wouldn't you? Yeah, for a crossing.
Yeah, there's enough room to move, I think.
Yeah, I do
Another
too.
pun, sorry.
Yeah.
They seem to be unavoidable. There is flexibility, I think, isn't there, enough to make it practical, reasonable.
Yep.
Makes sense. Yes, Jamie.
Through your chair, one of the pieces of feedback we had during our engagement was that farmers already have a range of things that they've got in place, and they felt it unfair that if we brought them towards a very narrow, you must have this particular sign, so they all have to go out and buy signs or lights, and they just felt that was a bit of an overreach. And I think we can address the risk through these different optional methods. Yep.
Agree. Thank you. Great, Claire.
Great. And the last one is crossing at night. Oh, the second to last one, crossing at night. So you need to, so that would be for the dairy herd situation. So must use two measures, including at least one of either D or G. So these are the same ones for crossing during state highways, right? Except for E is removed. E is the one about static signs. So what it's saying is that for crossing at night, so if you're crossing a dairy herd in the morning before sunrise, you need to have D or G. So D is vehicles with flashing amber lights, and G is the flashing amber light signs on posts. So really it's saying you need to have some light source at that point.
Councillor Maley.
Madam Chair, I think it says 3. Well, I'm looking at the bottom one. It says must use 3 measures, including at least one of these. And you said 2.
Through the chair, that's the last
Oh, I
item.
thought you were doing the last
Oh,
one.
sorry, we're doing that one.
All right. Okay.
So
I was looking at the wrong one. My apologies.
hopefully this table is clear enough, and that's something that we need to make sure of, is that this table is intuitive enough that somebody wanting to know what they need to do can just look at it and know quite clearly without too much, too much trouble trying to figure out what they need to do.
It seems clear to me. I think each item is written in a way that makes it very clear, and the chart I think sums things up well. Yep.
Great. So the last item now is crossing on a state highway at night. Right. So if there is a situation where a farmer has dairy cows that they need to cross before sunrise on a state highway, this is what they need to do. So they must use 3 measures, including at least one of either D or G. And again, D or G are the 2 that are light requirements. So having some sort of light source, plus at least one more. And the rationale for this is that we've tried to sort of stage these in a hierarchy of potential risk. So obviously lowest risk would be crossing or driving on a local road, and then on a state highway, and then on a state highway at night. So the requirements are slightly higher for each one.
That hierarchy is clear. So I've been, it's clear to me as I've been going through that it reads that way. Okay. So I think that's been really well framed. Yep. No issues there?
Nope.
Thank you.
All right. So point 8 now, below the chart, is agree that other safety measures not listed in the resolutions above may be used if agreed to in writing by the council. So this is taken out of a previous section, a section in the original bylaw that was consulted on, which is actually section 9.2H of the bylaw that went out for consultation.
Sorry,
9.2H. This is just one of those points where something has actually changed places in the bylaw, and I just wanted to bring your attention to the, where it was track changed from. So in 9.2H there, that's the section that was originally talking about crossing in the hours of darkness. And down at the bottom there, it says that you can use such warning or such warning light system that are approved by the council. So that was what was consulted on. So we wanted to make sure we retained that ability for farmers to suggest a different kind of lighting system that maybe isn't included in one of these 7 options, but may be, a reasonable way to, shed light on the crossing.
Through the
Nice.
chair, the other thing is when we brought that over, because we consolidated all these requirements into one, or proposing to into one section to make it easier for people to navigate. And it seemed illogical to say, well, you can propose alternative light solutions to us without making it a little bit broader to say, well, if someone approaches Jamie's team and they're confident that the solution that's different to one of the 7 measures is a really good one, it may be over and above the requirements that we have here in terms of meeting safety expectations. Why do we close our minds to it? So that's all that there is. Yeah.
And in terms of if agreed to in writing with the council, so someone can send it right in an email and get a response back. So it's not onerous at all. Thank you.
Point 9 there is remove Schedule 1 and all references to it. So Schedule 1 was those NZTA stock guidelines that was attached that had quite specific requirements for where things needed to be placed. It included that 300-meter signage requirement for crossings. So that has been, due to the feedback we got, which was pretty much by and large, this is unnecessary and not really relevant to the majority of local roads in Tasman, to remove that. So that's just been taken out and all references to it.
Any issue there? No.
And I could just add that anything in there that was relevant has been carried over and written into the bylaw as it is now. So anything that, we did keep from those guidelines is still in here.
Great. Thank you.
All right, 10, remove the requirement for a static sign on stock droves. So that kind of relates to the NZTA guidelines that were removed. As one of the things that was required there was to have those TW6 signs on droves. So that's gone. Point 11, change the signage distance from 300 meters and or 3 times the speed limit in meters to 150 meters away from the point of crossing when and where signage is chosen as one of those road safety measures. That's also approximately the distance that that one-way bridge signs are placed away.
Yep.
That was one of the comments that submitters brought up.
Thank you.
Point 12 there is deleting sections 9.2 D, E, and 9.2 H, as these road safety requirements will be covered by the resolutions in resolutions 2, which are all of those road safety requirements there. So again, that was just another example of sort of consolidating the bylaw and trying to bring all those road safety requirements into the same section, so it's a lot easier to read and there's no jumping around.
Yeah, so a bit of flow, bit of
Yeah.
framing.
That's right.
Great. Thank you.
Right. So through the chair, are we happy with that section? That's the end of the road safety management section.
I'm happy with that section. I think you've consolidated things into something that's clear and easy to follow.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. So the next section here is permits and registration. So the key change here is the removal, which is point 13 here, is the removal of the requirement to attain a permit for any livestock movements, replaced by a requirement to register certain livestock movements as outlined below. So again, the permit we got from the feedback, the idea of having to apply for a permit was considered unnecessary, hasn't been required for the last 5 years. Any potential cost involved in that was seen as something really not needed by the farming community at the moment. And through our conversations, we came to the conclusion that the key purpose of having a permit was so that the council knew what was going on and was aware of any potentially hazardous activity on the road, and registering the droves or crossings should accomplish that same thing.
Yeah, great.
Right. So in section 14, there below, I'm working on my Roman numerals here. Section 14, below, the situations where farmers would need to be required to register with council at no cost would be any crossings or droves on a state highway, any crossings at night, droves longer than 5 kilometers, or droves or crossings in an urban environment. So those would be considered, as reflected in the chart that we just went through. Those are sort of the most high risk situations.
Yeah.
Okay. And section 15 below there clarifies that registering is for an ongoing activity if the livestock movement is reoccurring, and that you don't need to re-register for each individual crossing or drove if it's something that you do on a regular basis. There was a bit of concern about that in the submissions. That
Yeah. Do you think that's yep, I was just thinking about the wording. That's really,
Yes.
yeah, if that's clear, if we would give that to somebody who's not so familiar with stock crossings and bylaws, with that Dwayne.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to receive feedback on how we could make it clearer. It was quite hard to describe the ongoing activity of livestock movements versus a kind of a regular crossing or even a semi-regular drove. I guess that I was going to add was that I guess the point is that it's for, you know, a type of activity that's framed in the registration. So in the bylaw, what would actually happen is it would say it's for those circumstances, and if actually circumstances change, you'll need to give us a bell again. I didn't put it in here because I thought it was unnecessary, but I just wanted to make that clear. That's what that would in fact what happened. The bylaw will be framed to say, you know, if you register, you within say the terms of registration, all good. If the circumstances change, you'll need to give us another bell.
Yeah.
Through the chair, perhaps it would be easier to understand if we switched it around and said, clarify that if a livestock movement is regular or reoccurring, farmers or persons in charge of stock only need to register once.
I think that's the way. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was for you, mate, I was just going to approach it another day with B, crossings that are used regularly at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Could you just capture Claire's
Sure.
language there? Did you grab that?
I think I said,
Yeah.
Could you repeat it, please, Claire?
if the livestock movement is regular or reoccurring, farmers would only need to register once for the ongoing activity.
Yeah, you're right.
And you could always add unless there's a change in circumstance if you wanted. That registration. Just if you can remove the word registration next, so clarify that if the livestock movement is regular or reoccurring.
The livestock movements, regular or reoccurring, farmers would only need to register once. I think that's very good to start that way.
Yeah.
For an ongoing activity. And then is there something extra to say? And if it's a
Say-
one-off,
Or we could say unless circumstances change, or
Yeah, I mean, maybe for clarity, we should do that because the bylaw, if you pass that resolution, I almost certainly want to put that in there to make it crystal clear, because of me it flows informally, but maybe it's better if it's explicitly stated.
but should we get rid of not for individual livestock
so
movements?
individual, you need one-off.
One-off,
One-off clearer than individual.
probably.
That's the livestock movement.
If
Regular or reoccurring, farmers would only need to register once for ongoing activity. Yeah. Registration.
Which applies to the crossings at night, doesn't it? So if you're just crossing once and blow moon at night, you don't have to.
Through the chair,
Yes.
it applies
Through
to
the-
circumstances in 14,
Yeah.
A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, through the chair, I think to be clear, you do have to register. If you're just crossing once at night, it still needs to be registered. So according to 14, So you have to register with council the following movements. So crossing at night. So even if you're only doing it once, you would need to register. But if that's something you're going to be doing on a nightly, a morning basis every morning, then you only need to do it once.
Through the chair, we had an example of someone who said that sometimes they pop home at night and they switch their sheep from one paddock from one side of the thing to another. I mean, it would be very simple for them to just register the fact that that's going to occur on an ongoing basis. They don't necessarily they don't need to specify exactly to the minute or anything like that, but the kind of frequency and that sort of thing, just so that council's aware of it. All of this is just so that council's aware of it, and so basically from time to time, if we need to notify our community, like a drove through a town or a really long drove on state highway, that we can notify the authorities and ourselves, and the community if necessary, that's going on. And the other reason for it is that, for example, a crossing at night, Jamie's team might want to go check from time to time that people are following the bylaw, because that's probably on a state highway, for example, that's the highest risk activity.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think the submitter was Hamish Barker on the Motueka Valley Highway, which is a local road. So the issue I have is that he's doing that spasmodically. What does the registration achieve?
Well, through the chair, the idea would be that, if he is just doing it randomly here and there, he would need to register for each one, and that would just alert council that something is happening. So if there were an accident, at least council would know what was going on, and hopefully have been able to monitor that, or just have that awareness. How many head of cattle or something he's crossing, so we can know how risky is that activity.
So I just wonder if we can tease that out. So he's only got to okay, Madam Chair? Yeah, that he's only got to register once, and then he can do it because predominantly I would think it was in the evenings.
So one of the
I just don't see the need to impose doing it every time.
But the language reoccurring would cover that. We're not specifying your reoccurring might be once a month.
Yeah.
Your reoccurring might be once every 2 months, but it is something that occurs through the farming practice.
Yeah,
Is that
and
predominantly his sheep.
Yeah.
And through the chair, it does say in the registration requirements, which were similar to the permit requirements, it says we've changed it to say approximately the approximate time of the crossing.
Yeah.
So, if you're crossing at 7 sometimes and 6 sometimes, that wouldn't need to be re-registered.
Right. So just be initially.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say, essentially the idea is that there are certain higher risk activities and we want to know about them or alert our community to them. The intention with resolution 15 is simply to try to make sure that it's not actually too onerous and that people can register for sort of ongoing activity without feeling like they have to give us a bell every time they move sheep. It's actually, the intent is definitely to reduce the obligation. Yeah.
Thank you. With the last wording there, not for individual livestock movements, does it help at all to say not for each individual livestock movement? Like I've just, does that make anything clearer or unnecessary? Oh, yes. No, we don't.
My obsession with communication, I think the typical thing with bylaws is we need, as you know, we need this stuff to be able to regulate. But the guts, all these questions you're asking here around words and interpretation, I think that's where when the comms go out, how we actually present this to the public, I'm picking will be very, there'll be the local government view on life, and then there's the how do we actually communicate this to the community and how it affects Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith, the farmer in Motueka. So I think it's really key that we actually translate this into usable language that the frequently asked questions that you're asking now get responded to in a easier way. But we still have to have this document that we, as you know, we need to regulate against. So there's 2 parts to this for me. So I'm hearing a lot of questions around language in here. I think sometimes we actually need to distinguish between what we need from a regulator and from how we communicate to the general public, just to help you.
Thank you. My questions around this was to do with how it flows through. So when I was reading it, I'd get to the last piece each time and go, oh, what's like it. So we're trying to say that if it's ongoing, regular practice, you just register once. Thank you very much. That the registration. So then we go not for. So
Yeah, through the chair, it says if the livestock movements are regular or recurring, then you need to register once, not for each individual livestock movement. So it's pretty clear that the not for is caveated by the fact that you're undertaking a regular activity that you register for.
Through the chair, I agree. I don't think we need that phrase "not for each individual livestock movement" at
that's
all.
what I'm wondering.
Especially following, unless circumstances change. If you're changing your phrase and then you're going back to the original point, which is confusing.
Yeah. So language is important in terms of people reading through it and understanding what we mean. And when I get hooked up on something, it's usually because often it's because it is that. What are we quite saying there? So I would agree with that. Are you each happy with that? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Great. All right, down to the last one on the page, 16. Agree that license requirements are retained for grazing on road reserve and permit requirements are retained for constructing a physical race on the road reserve. So those were two things that were in the bylaw that went out for consultation, was that if you want to graze on the road, on the margin, on the road reserve, you need a license. And if you want to build a race, so build like a fence on outside the paddock on the road reserve, you need a permit for that. Now, we didn't receive any feedback from the community on that not being acceptable. It was only on the permits for livestock movements, and those were still in the draft bylaw. So we just wanted to bring attention to that. While we said permits are no longer required, those two situations still do require a license or a permit.
Yep, I'm happy with that.
Yep. All right, next page. We've got amend section 7.2 by allowing crossings for milking purposes within the hours of darkness, but require farmers to register this activity and comply with the requirements listed in resolution 2 that we just discussed in that chart.
Yep, that's clarifying, isn't it? Because I think originally it was it wasn't.
Through the chair, the draft bylaw originally said that crossing in the hours of darkness was not allowed.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, last section, definitions and language. So we've changed the definition of stock in the interpretation section of the draft bylaw to any farm animal, including cattle, sheep, pigs, goats, and deer, but excluding horses. So that was to respond to the feedback we got from a few different submitters about, what about horses, riding a horse down the road, or
llamas.
Haven't included llamas. Perhaps we should. What
People farm llamas? Do they move them?
Do they move?
Through the chair, they possibly do. I actually joked about llamas myself with the team. I guess this is what I'm not aware of any large llama farms in the district. And potentially, if it becomes an issue, you can tweak it by resolution in council if that became an issue. The key thing there was what we wanted to exclude horses because, again, I'm not aware of anyone who has a ranch here that breeds horses and does large droves or anything like that. So it's a bit of a non-issue here, but it was creating a concern for people who just want to ride in a group of horses that suddenly they were caught by the stock control bylaw and had to put up signs and people waving flags and such like. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, great. And section 19 there, amend various sections with an S to consistently use drove and drover to mean taking stock along a road, and persons in charge of stock when referring to somebody crossing stock across a road.
It does. We had some mix up, didn't we, in terms, so that's clarifying again.
That's right.
Thank you.
Through the chair, there were a few places where drove was still being used to refer to any stock movements. So we just wanted to make it
Yeah.
really clear that drove and droving and drover were only used when we were talking about a
Right.
long movement down the road, not across.
Yes, we're not driving.
Since the
Across the
requirements
crossing.
are slightly different for droving and crossing.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah. The emphasis is there, isn't it? So it just helps line things up. Yep.
All right, well, through the chair, that's the end of the amended, the recommended changes in resolution 2.
That's what we did. It's just the last three resolutions, which are basically saying we agree to anything above. Will tell us to go away and change the bylaw. We will agree that you still think that the bylaw is the most effective way, or the appropriate way of addressing issues that it's trying to control. Apologies. Sorry about that. And agree to recommend the amended bylaw with faithfully reflecting the changes you've resolved to the full council for 22nd September consideration. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Ryan.
So pretty happy with what Dwayne's just talked about, but I just have a further question around the bylaw itself. And Claire, perhaps you can clarify if this is, so I'm looking at 9.2, droving stock across the road, and we get down to 9.2B. So is this section still in there? Because I don't want to waste time. So the one I'm struggling with, gates will be erected on both sides of the crossing on the boundary between the road and the race entrance on the adjoining land. What does that mean?
Through the chair, that is, just to clarify, that is still in the bylaw. That hasn't been removed. And I took that as meaning that there would be on either side of the crossing points, or droving, or, where you're bringing and taking the stock from on a drove, there would be a gate on those where you're bringing them in and out of a paddock.
I took that you're bringing them out of the gate, that you had to say the gate's here, for example. You had to have a gate here. That's the way I read that.
That whole thing is the gate.
Yeah,
Mm.
this is the gate itself.
Yeah.
And then to get out to the road, you've got to have a gate there on either side.
Oh.
Which is not what we want.
On the boundary between the road. On the boundary between the road and the race entrance.
On the boundary.
Yeah, so the road and the.
Is the race
entrance.
There's the road
On the
entrance.
adjoining
you've got to have a
land.
gate.
I can understand on a race, but if you're just bringing them out of the gate, say I'm on a sheet, you're not going to put a gate on either side of the gate on the either side of the gateway to get them onto the road.
No, I don't. Through the chair, I don't think that's what it's implying.
Maybe to avoid that. Sorry, maybe to avoid that, it could just be slightly reworded, because I'm sure the intent is there's a gate on each side of the road, not on each side of the race.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, but with some crossing, some dairy farmers do have a gate or tapes they put across, as Cleve said. And that's on either side, but like if you even sheep like we are, Cameron was, you're not going to have a wing gate for one for a better word on either side of the gateway out onto the road, between the road and the property boundary.
I think the key in it is talking about the boundary between the road and the race.
Yeah.
It's very clear to me. There's the race with the entrance way in, and there's the road, and it's the boundary between them that you've got to have a gate. That's how I'm reading it.
I'm reading it as that you've got to have wings.
Yeah, no.
But through the chair, the way I was interpreting it was that you just couldn't have like an open paddock.
No.
It needed to be. Well, yeah, exactly. So.
Well, not in this
Language is
maybe one or two way up the.
Language is a funny thing, isn't it?
Yeah. We might come back to this. So I'm aware that we've got a 10:30 break and we've got a morning tea for you, and we don't want to eat into that with our language conundrums. So let's break for our the morning tea, and we'll come back when you're You've done that. Okay. On Zoom. And there's nobody on there. So we were looking at 9B, 9.2B, and both sides of the crossing on the boundary.
Yeah.
We could add something that says, and if you're not sure what that means, ring Councillor Brian.
And he'll get you confused.
Okay.
All right.
Now I've read it again and seen the diagram, it's clearer.
Yeah. Any other, so we've been through the resolution here today. And are there, and thank you, it's been very helpful to go through that just para by para and get clear. And are there any other thoughts or comments that either of you have?
So, no, none from me, Madam Chair. We've made those changes, and I think we noted it on traffic safety was on each side, so that's about it.
Anything further?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, just I think that we've really covered off all the concerns that were raised through submissions that I'm aware of. And really appreciate the work the team has done to get us to this place, particularly Claire. I guess this has been quite a large learning curve from, I think he initially told me that you had no experience there. Now you've actually been on a drive and done some stop crossings and that. So it's all character building and helps on your CV maybe one day. And I think we've got it to a really good place with effort. So, and appreciate that you have done, both you and Drain and others have done long years to do that. But yeah, hopefully we can get this through council next week, which obviously you won't be here, are you?
No.
So would you be present? Yeah. So I think, yeah, great effort to get us in a much better place. But I do think for the record, we need now to get some comms out about the changes and the positivity of what we've done and what Claire's done to make it better for all. Whether we need to get Darren or someone from the communications team to talk to Dwayne and Claire about the changes and get some information out there. Or whether that's post the council meeting, I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you. Are you happy to move the resolutions?
Yes, I am.
And you're happy to second, Councillor Mayling? Thank you. This is going to go to full council on which date?
And the 22nd of September.
22nd September. I imagine that's the appropriate point at which comms come out about it.
Yeah, I'll have a chat with you, Madam Chair, and probably John too, just around the comms program with it. There may be some advantage in doing a little bit of preemptive communications work a little bit earlier. You know, just talking about the fact that council's considering changes that are positive, blah, blah, blah. But we can have a chat about that after.
So how to get best bang for buck if we're going to, when we put it out. Have you got anything further, Claire?
Yeah, through the chair, I was just going to say that we've put its effective date is the 1st of November in the bylaw. So that gives time to do some of those pre-coms and to notify the public of the bylaw. But yeah, that'll be over a month to get some word out before it becomes effective.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. And I know, you know, last week here, I'm a bit under the pump to get things through to us. So I am really valuing the work you put in, Claire, and the tight times that you worked to. And there was just sort of like a range of things that came in. I think that we ended up in this bit of a pickle around the bylaw, which has been unfortunate. And I note your comments last time we were together, Dwayne, about, you know, being proud of the quality of bylaws in council here. And let's hope that's, we don't hope, but, you know, we're wanting this to be another bylaw and piece of work that we add to that, that we are proud of and that is effective and is clearly understood and well managed. So nothing further with that. Yes, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Are carried. Thank you. And I think that leaves us to have a karakia here to close. Thank you for you both on the flight deck. It's great that you come in, you sit there quietly and working away, but you're contributing significantly to the work of council, and I appreciate the diligent way you go about doing that. So thank you. Karakia to close. Tawhiri mai ngā hua o te taiao, mai a papa tuanuku e takoto nei, ki a ranginui e tū iho nei, tūturi whakamaua ki a Tina, Tina hui e tae ki e. Kia ora everybody.